I'm pleased to welcome Brad Gerstner. Brad is unique in perspective to join us.
Unique.
We'll see uniquely what. But he's both a tech founder and a founder of his own investment firm, Altimeter. Altimeter is an investor in some of the most successful tech companies. And beyond that, Brad also has worked closely with several CEOs that we've heard of. He also speaks Trump, which is a whole unique set of skills that he can bring to us to help us navigate the opportunity that is AI. And as we've got up here at AI or Die, which is Brad's expression. Brad, thank you for joining us. Maybe we could start by telling us some about, put AI in perspective from what inspired you to join tech in the first place and where are we going now the next decade with AI?
Well, it's great to be here. And I have so much, our firm started about the same time, coming out of the crisis in '08. And it's just been awesome to watch and to partner with Khosla over the course of the last 15 years. And I think we both share this, when I listen to Vinod, this extreme passion for what technology means to humanity. And, when President Milei gave his speech in Davos last year, and he talked about the rate, the length of time it takes for GDP, global GDP to double. And so we went back and we put numbers around these slides. And I shared this with my kids. I have a 16 and 14-year-old. For basically 2,000 years, there was very little human advancement. There was very little growth in GDP. It was about hunter-survivor. And it was innovation that started around the late 1800s that started driving global GDP. And that innovation led to this, right? It transformed humanity. Humans, fewer people were dying in childbirth. More people were literate. Rates of happiness went up on a global basis. And so what gets me up every morning, in 1996, I grew up in rural Indiana. I go to law school, and I see, and I got into technology when I was young because I thought this might be my path out, of this place. In '96, I see Andreessen on the cover of Time magazine for the Netscape browser. I gather my law school classmates around one of the few computers we had in the library. I said, this fucking changes everything, right? Now everybody's going to see the power. And I literally bought a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley, flew out and started walking up and down Sand Hill Road, introducing myself to some people. I wouldn't make my way back to it until 1999, but that was like this profound anthropological belief that this is the thing that drives the world forward. And so when we think about why technology from an investment perspective, I think it's the best free lunch in investing, right? Technology has out-compounded non-tech for the last 20 years. 20 years ago, technology was 5% of global GDP. Today, it's 15% of global GDP. When we're here 10 years from now, is it going to be higher or lower than 15% of global GDP? Well, of course, it's going to be higher. And I would argue this moment, the birth of this supercycle, I know Bill Gates is speaking here later today. I heard Bill say in 2015 or 2016, Meg Whitman said to him, haven't all the interesting things been done? We have internet, we have mobile, we have cloud. And Bill said, Meg, we won't even start until machines begin to think. Machines don't think today. They're dumb. This is 2015. He's like, when machines begin to think with us, then the world really changes. And so I think, we did this podcast with Jensen last year, about the time I'm good friends with Noam Brown. Noam wrote Pluribus and Liberatus and Cicero. He cracked the game of six-handed poker. And of course, he is the force behind inference time reasoning at OpenAI. And I'm going to tell a little story about how he cracked the game of six-handed poker because I'm really into poker. He tried to do this for 10 years. And, he was training this learning model on more and more games of poker every year. And by 2017, he had trained the model on 1 trillion games of poker. And then he would go test it against the world's best poker players like Phil Hellmuth, and they would lose. And he sat there, he said, I know they haven't played more than 1 million hands of poker. Our bot has played 1 trillion hands of poker, so how can it lose? But then he just observed. And what did Phil Hellmuth do after the flop? He stopped and thought, and he recalculated based upon a changing set of information. He was doing inference time reasoning, right? He wasn't giving you a snap answer. It wasn't a one-shot answer at that moment in time. And so that's what he built into the model. And by 2017, they won the game of six-handed poker. And then his question was, could I take this thing that was specifically applicable to poker, inference time reasoning, combined with pre-training, and could we generalize that? And that's what came to be known as the O1 model, obviously, at OpenAI. And so I share the passion of, I think, a lot of people in this room and of Vinod and certainly of Khosla, that of the super cycles that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, started with internet in 1998, 1999, mobile, cloud, social. This by far is the biggest and most impactful of all of them. And the reason I would argue that is the same reason Gates argued, right? Every single consumer and every single enterprise will reconfigure how they operate because this machine will now make us all bionic. And I say to my kids, some schools were afraid of kids using ChatGPT. I said, you have to become the best at it. It's like a bionic suit that you get to put on. And the sooner you put on the bionic suit and the better you get at using the bionic suit, the better you're going to be able to, have an impact on whatever you want to do, whether that's in Washington or the movies or technology or whatever. So that's why I'm excited.
Let's talk about the bionic suit, so to speak, and actually putting it on, because everyone in the audience has the religion, so to speak. But you've worked with some CEOs, including Facebook, Zillow, on going from I believe it to what do I actually do differently. So help people with that. How do you go from I get the religion to now I need to reinvent my company?
Well, so we have the ChatGPT moment in kind of November, December of 22, and I think the most forward-looking founders and CEOs knew at that moment that something was fundamentally changing. So one of my dear friends and multiple time founder of Expedia, of Zillow, of Glassdoor, Rich Barton, calls up Gurley and I, who were previously on the Zillow board, and Bill's back on the board now, but we have both been on the board in the early days. And Rich said, will you guys come to an offsite? We're going to pull out, this is in February of 23, we're going to pull out our top 50 leaders, and we have to figure out how to red team, blue team AI, right? So what is red team, blue team? And I think this is a useful framework. So I would say Rich is, Rich started at Microsoft in 1991, 92, was trying to build a travel website on the internet that eventually became, Expedia. But so the red team's job was to improve the basic business model using AI, right? So a basic example of this was we have a lot of customer care and we have a lot of salespeople. Can we make them bionic using AI and therefore increase the margins of the business, okay? Because they have increased conversion rates, et cetera. The blue team's job was to reconceptualize. If we were starting the business today, if the website didn't exist, if the mobile app didn't exist, how would we attack our mission, right, of discovering and buying a home and living in that home a much more pleasant experience for consumers? And so, that's what they've gone on to do. I would say mostly in the sphere of transforming the margin structure of the existing, business using AI. But, again, I remember they're a consumer website in 2007, 2008. They realized that, everybody, in order to compete in consumer, you had to, index well on Google. And I remember Gurley saying, in the board meeting, this is the most dangerous thing we could possibly do. Eventually, Google will pull the rug on, these free links. And so they really, unlike a lot of other websites, focus on building the brand outside of Google. And, that was a powerful idea. But now, and I think I have a slide on this actually, the whole paradigm of search is changing. If you're a consumer app and you live in the search ecosystem, right, the one thing we know for certain, 2012 was the first time desktop search volumes went negative. Why? Because of, this device. And the question everybody had was, are we going to search on this device or will we just go to these apps, right? Why do I need to search when I can just open up the app? But the fact of the matter is Google was quite clever. Although search volumes didn't really grow that much over the last decade, right? They just pushed things further and further down the page. They monetized more, et cetera. And so they were able to grow earnings at double digits, notwithstanding the fact that engagement wasn't really growing that much. Well, that all changes now. You've seen what's happening. Like the existential moment for Google is here because they let ChatGPT go first. Right? ChatGPT became the verb, and I would argue maybe if we go to this slide right here, AI is scaling way faster than the internet did. So I was an investor in both Meta and Google. Google I bought in the IPO in 2004. Meta, we were big investors really starting in 2012. It's very clear that once you own the mind share in the thing, it's almost impossible for somebody else to dislodge you, right? Even if they have a marginally better thing, because inertia is this massively powerful human force. And so the ChatGPT moment, and we use as the launch year, like when the product really became known in the public consciousness. And you can see that OpenAI, largely ChatGPT in terms of revenue today, is just scaling dramatically faster than any of those folks. And now Google's got all the talent and all the people and great models. So why aren't they closing the gap on ChatGPT? I just came back from 10 days in the Middle East, and I will tell you, every kid in the street and every adult you talk to, there's only one consumer interface being used around the world. It's ChatGPT. It is the verb. It is the thing that Google had in 2003. And so, when we think about where that value accrues, Dave, there were a lot of other good search businesses, right? 1998, in fact, it wasn't obvious to a lot of people, even in 2004, when Google went public, that they were going to win, right? It was all about Terry Simmel coming to Yahoo, and he was going to dethrone, Google's early lead. And I would argue that, the same thing is happening here. So there'll be a battle in enterprise, but I think the battle in consumer is largely played out.
I know you've worked closely with Mark at Meta. What can we learn from how he's navigated AI opportunity? Because somehow it's almost caught up with Google in market cap, and it's not ChatGPT.
Yes, no, for sure. And what I would say, about Meta, and I give Mark a tremendous amount of credit, and I would say working closely with them gives me too much credit. But I did in 2022, after they renamed the company, and they shifted focus to Reality Labs, and they told the street basically it's a 10-year project. We don't know when we'll earn a return, but we're going to invest $25 billion a year, like more than the Apollo project. And I was an early investor in ByteDance TikTok, and I saw how, I had argued with the team at Meta for years, you guys need to invest in GPUs, because you need to have a product like TikTok in order to compete. And of course, it took them a long time to get on board, but eventually they did it. And then they launched Reels. And so by the summer of 22, Meta was a real leader in AI, but using it to target ads and content to people on Reels. And so I said, I just don't get this big bet and this diversion because people like Noam are leaving. He was at Meta. and they were all leaving because the stock was at $90. They didn't believe in Reality Labs, and they wanted to work on AI. And I just said, like, you're an AI-first company. We're on the precipice of, and I didn't know that ChatGPT was going to have the impact it did 3 months later, but we knew something was brewing under the surface. And to his credit, he said, by September, you're right, we're more of an AI company than we are an AR/VR company. And he totally pivoted the business. They went from 87,000 employees to 62,000 employees. In October of 22, they reorganized the company around AI starting in February of 23. Now, they have 3 billion daily users or weekly users who come to their family of apps. I've actually been surprised how bad the implementation on the product side has been. Right? I think the implementation in Instagram and WhatsApp and whatever, it's kind of annoying to me. I don't intend to be a user half the time. I just actually want to find Keith on Instagram or something. I type it in, and now I'm somehow in Meta AI land. But I will say this: they have won most of the wars of attrition, right? They have won most of the product wars of attrition, so I would absolutely not count him out. They're in beast mode, and he's committed to it. So I would say there, the other takeaway for me is we are in a golden age of margin expansion. So we have all different stage companies, in the room. To our earliest stage founders, right? If they're not doing something that's like AI first today, right? I always say, like, are you sure, right? But we have lots of companies that were founded 3, 4, or 5 years ago that have good businesses. And they're trying to figure out, how do I become more AI infused? Or in some cases, should I still be doing this? There's a company we incubated called Sigma. I incubated with Mike Spicer. And, it took us 3 years to find product market fit. It's kind of this BI layer that sits on top of Databricks and Snowflake. And now they're doing $200 million in revenue, growing 2 or 3x a year. They're doing incredibly well, signing up these big enterprise deals. But, I challenge Mike Palmer with the question, like, does this even need to exist in 3 years? Right? Won't I just talk to my AI? Right? When Satya came on our pod and he said that, that at the end of the day, most applications are just consumer interfaces sitting on top of a CRUD database. And, Mark Benioff calls me and he's like, that's not true. You have to have me on the pod. What is he talking about? And I said, Mark, I kind of agree with him. Like, when you and I meet, what I would like to do is just put my phone here and let it listen. And have ChatGPT listen to our conversation. That's my CRM. And the next time, it sends me a summary. And the next time I want to have a conversation, I said, what did I talk with Dave about the last time we talked? Right? Try to do that in a CRM today. Right? It doesn't work. That product should exist. That product may be ChatGPT because now it has infinite memory.
How should founders think about tech versus taste? How do they nail the interface?
Well, I mean, if you're a consumer application, I would put Perplexity out there. I'm an angel investor in Perplexity, and he's just done an unbelievable job of iterating that consumer interface very quickly and punching above his weight to stay relevant. I mean, he doesn't even have his own model, right? There's nothing particularly unique other than taste. But listen, I think I wouldn't start a consumer app today that was going head on against ChatGPT because again, it comes back to this mind share. And so to dislodge them at this point, you have to be 10x better. Has to be another orthogonal shift, right? Which I think is very hard. Remember, Google controlled the entire metaphor for the internet, and I would argue largely for most of technology, was controlled by Google for 20 years, despite social, despite mobile, despite cloud, right? And so it's just now that they're being challenged because I have something, like my kids say, why would I possibly want to hunt through these 100 blue links when it just gives me the answer, right? Which is what I said about Google the first time I saw. Why would I possibly go to a library and use a card catalog when I could just use Google? ChatGPT is the first magical experience, right, that somebody like my kids have had in order to, like, solve those problems for themselves since Google itself.
I have some macro questions for you, but before we do that, any other thoughts for the CEOs in the audience around anything you see CEOs not doing that they could do better to capitalize on this opportunity?
I think the hardest thing as a CEO, I mean, listen, I'm a CEO. I'm a CEO of Altimeter. And the financial services industry, the investing business, is being transformed by AI. How are we using AI? And so I think it's really hard because day to day we have businesses to run, right? You have things to do, but somehow you have to carve out the time. And I would say that there are only 2 or 3 times in the last 20 years where you had to say, I need to risk carving out this time because failure to take that risk could do me more harm, right? And then I'll say one other final provocative thing. I have a lot of, I started 3 companies before I started Altimeter, all kind of base hit doubles in the online search business, sold the last one to Google. It became Google Hotel Finder. And, people, I remember Rich Barton saying to me, you're a better investor than you are an entrepreneur. I said, why? He said, because as an entrepreneur, you need to suspend disbelief. And he goes, you're always thinking about the things that can go wrong. And he was probably right about me. But I looked at it and I said, it wasn't clear to me that we could ever have the breakout impact that we wanted. And at this moment in time, if you're working on something, and if you're saying, I see no path to reinvent this around AI, and and I think it's kind of not the size of idea that I thought it was going to be, right? I'm one of the founders and investors who believes like it's okay to land the plane, right? And I'm sorry if not everybody agrees here, but I'm saying to some of my companies, this is too important a time. The opportunities are too big, right? You get one life. Have maximum impact at this moment with what you want to do. And if that means landing the plane on this thing that doesn't easily port to this new world, and you have an amazing idea for something that could be big and impactful in this new world, then do it.
2 last things to cover. One is, since you're someone that can also think about downsides and threats, what are the things that could threaten the progress with AI? And somewhere in there, we could weave in some anecdotes about how to understand our current administration.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share any of these folks. But, Trump came in and there was a lot of enthusiasm, pro-growth, pro-business, pro-investment, lower taxes, et cetera. And then immediately we have this nuttiness occurs, right? And you got nuclear Navarro saying we're going to go have $1 to $2 trillion of global tariffs, and there's a lot of embedded in there is this idea that we can somehow like keep AI to ourselves. It's too risky to allow it to diffuse around the world. And you had this team, Hassett and Bessent, who I'm close with, who are, have I think a much more modest view about what this means. Happily, the Fed saw this and said, we're going to lower our forecast. Happily, Bessent and Hassett appear to be emerging. I think what I would say is this. I'm fighting really hard, and David Sachs is on the right side of this, that we need to diffuse American technology globally. Imagine in 2001, 2002, if we had said to Google, you can't launch in any other country unless you come to Washington and beg for a license to launch in any other country. The world would not run on American technology, right? Why is Europe Europe? Why are they stuck in this quagmire? Because of that. And we run the risk of that. And, for a long time, I think the advantage of Silicon Valley is that it was 2,800 miles away from Washington. Today, it's too important for us to ignore Washington, right? So I'm spending time making sure that the golden goose that we have is this beautiful system of incentives that allow us all to be entrepreneurs, to fund entrepreneurs, to have the most dynamic system of risk capital and capitalism in the world. That gave rise to the GDP growth and the increase in human conditions that we saw to begin with. But there is a risk that we become Europe. And I'm going to take 30 seconds to talk about this because I think this is part of that solution that I've been working really hard on. And we've just had some breakthrough progress. We can't leave 60% of the people in this country feeling like they don't share in the upside, right? AI is going to have massive dislocation. People are going to lose their jobs, right? And today, only about 20 to 30% of people really participate in the upside of compounding. We have this wealth gap that is growing really large. Less than half of people under the age of 40 have a positive view of capitalism, which is why we have this European socialist creep, that occurs in Washington that wants to regulate everything, because frankly, a bunch of people are pissed off about capitalism. And by the way, I can't blame them. If you're losing your job, you don't have any savings, right? You don't see your kids having a better life than you had. That system is not working for you. So this is very simple. You start every child at birth, 3.7 million kids, with a $1,000 investment account in the S&P 500. It's a 401k from birth. Now we have companies representing tens of millions of employees, from Uber to iHeart, from NVIDIA to Dell, who are going to contribute to the accounts of the kids of their employees. Massive philanthropic contributions. Moms and dads can contribute. And most importantly, every child in America. In 20 years, there'll be 100 million kids that will open up this app and see that they own a little bit of Berkshire Hathaway, of Apple, of NVIDIA. They feel like they have skin in the game. They're part of the system. They're rooting for the system, not rooting against the system. I fought for this for 3 years. We just got it included in the reconciliation bill. The House lost their mind, some Freedom Caucusers, and tried to rename it MAGA accounts. We're going to get it amended back. We're going to get it amended back to Invest America in the Senate. But most importantly, these are the type of ideas. This room is infused with entrepreneurs who have great ideas. This idea started at our kitchen table in Woodside, California 3 years ago. And we're going to make it law. And every child in this country is going to get an investment account. Those are the type of creative ideas to create the alignment of incentives that have made this country great, and I think that can defend it from ending up with the collective decision-making problems that Europe has, et cetera. So thank you for letting me
Thank you,
that.
Brad. That is an optimistic note to end on.